Shall we dive in to what you're doing here today? Where should we
Let's do it.
start? Where do we even start? I guess the thing with you is I want to focus so much on the growth and the strength and the how did you get to this point here? Because I think what is going to be so useful for people is that they're going to look at you and go, oh, wow, she did that. She's doing that. So maybe I can do that too. It's possible.
Yeah.
And I think with trauma stuff, let me know what you think. But I guess there is so much we could, well, it depends how you want to do this. Whether you want to just give people like a bit of the Reader's Digest version of what has transpired in your life, or if you want to go the other way and go to the this is where I'm at now and backtrack. I don't know. How do you want to tell this story? It's an amazing...
Yeah. I don't know. We can start with the Reader's Digest.
It doesn't have to be
Reader's Digest. Start with like my right now, like today, my commitment kind of to this work and to kind of what being trauma informed and showing up daily for me can look like. So before the podcast, I was like, oh, podcast interview, it's scary. And but also just I'm so passionate about talking about this stuff. Like there was a guy, we're at a caravan park, and he was chatting to my husband, and they were having small weather chats, and my husband was talking about wanting to get kind of into stuff, and of course I went over there and like immediately like we're talking about trauma and like all sorts of healing modalities, and he'd been learning about microdosing, and I just like that's who I am. Like I live and breathe this way of life and getting into the deep and meaningfuls. And so I came back into the van and I danced it out. I shook my body and I went through a little emotion circle and just expressed some sadness, some joy, some bliss, some ecstasy, some anger. And I just moved with it a little bit. And that's a daily practice for me, because often I can feel really stuck and heavy by all of the stuff that I'm carrying day to day. And at different times and stages in my life, that's looked radically different. And I'm thankful for the shifts and for all the different things. But yeah, where I am now really started when I was 17. And I had my first repressed memory come up. So one night I was staying up late and I rented a movie on iTunes. Only time I've ever rented a movie on iTunes. It's 99 cents. And a very, very strange movie. And kind of incest and repressed memories and stuff was in the movie. And the next morning I woke up with just a sense of something that had happened to me with another child when I was younger. And I was just like, I watched this movie and then this is like, I just was so kind of caught off guard. And so I went downstairs. I was living with my sister at the time. And I said, hey, do you remember, my friend such and such and this thing that happened, with Play-Doh? And she was like, yeah, of course. And I was like, what? I was like, I didn't remember. And so the first memory that came to me was one that was kind of provable. It was like something that at least, my sister remembered. And it was one that felt really like I didn't have this whole like, oh, that's not real. I didn't have quite such a hard time believing it and accepting it and integrating it. And so when that memory came up, I pretty much immediately got vaginismus and vulvodynia. And I didn't know what either of those things were at the time. I just knew that sex was a way that I felt worthy and loved. And it was I was really kind of addicted to sex and using it to feel good enough in myself. And I thought that my body was really all I was worth. And so I used that all the time. And then all of a sudden it was incredibly painful. I ended up getting a tear from trying to have sex. And I just thought, I'm totally broken, and I didn't know what to do. And I have an aunt who is a New Yorker and very pro therapy. And I was like, oh, Aunt Anne said that therapy is great. So I'm going to go find a therapist. And I knew that my parents had really been abusive and neglectful in a lot of ways. And so I kind of called up my dad and said, hey, you owe me this, and you need to pay for my therapy. So I started going to therapy, and it was really a space where, every week I had stuff coming up. I was still very much living in the abuse and just really deep in the trauma. And so it was a space where I could kind of recognize how deep things went, and start to begin to take care of myself. And so I did, and it was really hard. That year there was still a lot of really hardcore trauma stuff happening in my life and in my family. And I ended up
17. Let's go back and remind people again. You're 17.
Yeah.
Which is
17.
An age that is so tricky for so many of us anyway. So that's amazing.
Yeah. And I think I just, I always knew that, I had some depression stuff and anxiety stuff, but I just thought, well, everyone else in my family does too. So that's the way life is. And, and then I knew that I had to, I was like, my vagina broke, so got to do something. And even with that though, I had no idea what was happening with my body for maybe a year. And it was actually my boyfriend at the time who on Reddit, he was trying to read about what might be happening. And he found out about vaginismus on a Reddit thread of all things. And so then I went to my therapist and was like, do you think this could be happening? And she had no idea what it was. And the treatment recommendations for vaginismus and vulvodynia are pretty horrifying in the mainstream world, at least for someone who's got the kind of trauma that so much there. But yeah, so I ended up moving away from my family and spending a year doing full-time volunteer work at a public school in New York City. And it changed everything for me. I think that changing my environment was huge for me, and having space to even physically be able to start taking care of myself and start to kind of unravel the trauma bonds that were so deeply woven in me and my body. And so over the next, I think 17, I keep forgetting how old I am. I think I'm 26, about to turn 27. But the last couple of years have also been quite a lot. So I'm like, am I 27? I honestly don't know, and I'm really bad at math.
So yeah, sure, we'll go with that.
So we'll just go with 9 years. So over the next 9 years, I moved around quite a lot. I found a couple of different therapists, and it really, the trauma world has really blown up in the past 9 years, and particularly the last 3 years, I would say. And at that time, it just wasn't, it wasn't really talked about in that way. And even my therapists, they just were not really trained in, deep childhood trauma stuff. And they were all really well-intentioned and all, I think really cared. But that was kind of it, and now we're kind of I'm willing, you can totes come and work with me, but I'm at a loss. And I was like, well, I've showed up here and it took me enough to get this far, so I don't really know what else to do if you're at a loss, so I'll just keep showing up here. And then EMDR had been mentioned to me a few times as a thing that was the trauma thing that people knew about. So eventually, when I had the capacity, I found an EMDR therapist, and I'd been having lots of flashbacks and nightmares and intrusive thoughts about incest. And I really was very adamant that something was wrong with me, something was wrong with my brain, that I'd watched this movie and that had planted something in me, and nothing physical had ever happened. And the first EMDR therapist that I saw said to me, it sounds like your dad probably sexually abused you. So if we go down this path, that's probably going to come up. And I was like, I didn't say anything to her, but I was like, fuck you. How could you say that to me? emailed my old therapist and was like, how dare she, and I went and I bought makeup on my dad's credit card. I was like, this is, you're paying for this. Yeah, so I found a new EMDR therapist, and I remember saying to her, what are the symptoms? Like, do I have the symptoms? Like, and she went through like, oh, maybe some UTIs, or like, none of the things she said rang true. And even that is like, the symptoms of complex childhood trauma, like I experienced, are so wide and diverse, and often they like are not present. That's one of the biggest things that happens, is that people that have been in this trauma for so long learn so well to shut it all down. And so I was just like, oh, cool. I don't remember having UTIs as a child or wetting the bed, so must not be real. And
it's like, oh, here's this thing that we can like cut you open, like metaphorically, literally, and see it. Is it there? Is it not? Oh, okay, well, it's a yes or a no. Like, it's just, it blows my mind that that's where we're
it's
still
so nuts. And it's like now, like in the there's the like Bible of childhood sexual abuse for women. I'm blanking on the name right now. But they talk about how like a good place to start is just if you think maybe something happened, or if you have thoughts coming up, or if you have like, that's enough to begin. And so yeah, over the next, several years, I traveled. I lived in Australia for a little while. I lived in Sri Lanka. I had amazing experiences that were so healing outside of therapy. And eventually I moved to Nashville for a couple of years in America, and started doing EMDR there, and also was doing some art therapy, and built a really great relationship with the therapist that I was working with, which was really the most important part, I think. And in that time is when I was finally able to accept what was real and true for me, which is that I'm a survivor of father-daughter incest. And it was shattering. It was like this feeling that like all the puzzle pieces fit together, which was like kind of a relief, but it was also like looking at the most horrific puzzle ever. It was like, who the fuck would make this kind of puzzle? And I think that's something that kind of, for me, I think EMDR is really, it's like very measurable, and it's very, like there are steps, and I think it's kind of like this tool that's outside for me. It's like this tool that was outside of me that I could go, oh, it's the EMDR that's helping. And even that, that I was able to, through EMDR, accept this memory. It doesn't really feel right to me anymore for my healing process. I'm more into trusting what's coming up moment to moment and exploring with that and unfolding that. And I found that eventually I was doing a bit of EMDR in Melbourne as well, because I was really like, that's the thing that I need. Like, I need EMDR to be able to heal this stuff. And I realized that it was really like a kind of pushing myself. And I think kind of in a similar way, I think about it to kind of the way people take ayahuasca. And it's like, you could go on a drumming journey, for example, and have a similar experience to ayahuasca, but there's a different element of trust in self in a drumming journey, because you're not taking some outside substance or using some outside tool, and you have to trust what's coming up in you, which is a process in and of itself. And so yeah, I ended up finding some amazing healing workshops and spaces here in Australia by some people whose business is called Innate Wisdom Connection. And it's really about that, unfolding whatever your innate healing wisdom is trying to bring out. But yeah, when I got pregnant, I was living in Australia, and I had really, when I first moved to Australia, I was like, I built a beautiful community for myself in Nashville, and I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna do it again. Like, I know I can do it. It's gonna be great. And then I got here and I was pregnant, and it was hard, and I was lonely, and I was like, oh, I forgot. It takes time and it's hard.
Yeah.
And I was trying to find therapists and people, and it was horrible. It was hard. And then when I was 7 months pregnant, my father committed suicide. And I had already stopped talking to him. And so at first I just said, you know, I already grieved him. It is what it is. This is always how it was going to end. And now it's over. And that's that. And what do you know? That was not the whole truth of it.
Oh,
and so after I had,
what a shame, right?
yeah, you know, I was like, it's cool,
like,
guys.
yeah,
That's fine, actually.
yeah.
You know, I already grieved him. Check. You know, all those old intense coping mechanisms of dissociation came in. And, you know, I think that was one of the really hard things for my friends and family and my partner, is that because of the degree of my developmental trauma, I had these intense skills of like, it's fine, guys, look, I'm really happy. And, you know, I did that for my whole childhood.
Yeah.
And really, I was like living in a war zone. And so these things just came in. I was really just like, I'm just going to have the birth that I want. I'm just going to be the mom that I want, and it's going to be great. And I was in many ways, but I was also dying inside. And I really lost myself. And in the months of my postpartum time, I had that, you know, just an extreme dissociation going on and looking really great, like, yeah, fine. And then I just was having these intense, intrusive thoughts of killing myself. And I think, you know, I really believe that what we don't heal, we pass on to future generations. And my father, you know, there's not a lot of space for abusers to heal at all. And he didn't heal, and he didn't have those spaces. And, you know, there were certainly times that he tried, but yeah, it didn't happen. And so when he killed himself, all of a sudden, all these things got passed on to me to face. And that's been quite a journey. And I always was really clear that I didn't want to kill myself, but I couldn't stop seeing it happen. And I think that's true for a lot of people, that it feels like it's the only out. You know, it's not like this conscious, like, oh, I'd really like to do this. You know, it's just like something that keeps coming up and haunting people until it's like, yeah, okay, this is what's happening now. And yeah, so my husband and I have been on quite the healing journey since, with our little boy. And yeah, we've been to some amazing, I don't even want to call them workshops, but some amazing healing spaces. And we've been able to bring Calico with us. And, you know, really deep, also a huge part of it for me has been connecting to the earth and realizing that at one point I had this question keep coming up of like, how is it that I was also safe and supported the whole time? Because in some ways I was, like, I made it to here. So like, how, like, just this kind of dichotomy of like, these really horrifying things were happening, and this other stuff was also happening, and I also had a beautiful childhood, and I have beautiful memories, you know, and this deep connection to nature for me has always been true. And so reconnecting to Mother Earth and realizing that, you know, her support and healing power is always available to me. And you know, doing things like talking to rocks. I highly recommend having a chat with a rock. It's a great thing to do. And realizing that, you know, I think one of the biggest lessons for me has been how expansive healing is, and how healing is not, it doesn't look any one kind of way. And often what we think of as healing is so lame compared to what healing actually is, you know, or is so like light and fluffy compared to what healing actually is. And yeah, it just keeps blowing my mind. And I've been thinking about how can I like describe to people that healing is worth it, because it is painful. You know, part of it is that there was a lot of pain that I wasn't safe to express as a child. And so healing involves expressing that pain. And often it brings it all up, and it brings up these feelings of not being able to survive it. Because at the time I didn't have the space to feel like I couldn't survive it. I was just surviving it. And so, you know, it's like, how can I think for me, it's been this like, this uncovering of who I really am You know, there have been times where I've felt like every breath I've ever taken and every word I have ever said was because of what happened to me. And to be able to find words that are my words, you know, and breaths that are my breaths is something that is like, it's indescribable. It's not, there's no like, I don't think there is a way to describe truly what healing is worth, you know? And I think it's what the world needs. I think, trauma impacts all of us. And that's why I'm so damn passionate about it. Like, it's not, you know, I have this like heavy story, but it impacts everyone. We all have trauma. And there's space for all of it. You know, people say things like, oh, well, mine's not really significant. Wrong. Not true. Yeah. So that's me. That's the Reader's Digest, maybe.
It's a pretty good Reader's Digest version. I think the stuff I want to reflect on there is a huge part of what comes through for you when I hear you speak, when I see your face, is that, like it or not, I think you are like a bit of a poster child for healing doesn't have to be so heavy. And the work, because, you know, I think in the trauma world, I see a lot now that it's becoming a bit more mainstream, there's so much focus on like the work. And the work has to be like so deep and so like dark and so awful. And the work can really be, as you say, talking to rocks, laughing, finding that inner child stuff, having some joy. We can give ourselves permission to do the heavy stuff, sure, but then let it go and just live and get, as you said, find out who you get to be instead of who did you have to become to survival. Who did you have to be to just be here, living, breathing, still with us?
Yeah.
And then you get to sit with that and go, okay, right, now what?
Absolutely. And it's like, it's just like, you know, there are certainly moments where like I talk about a workshop that my mom actually came from America to, and I came back and everyone was like, but was it healing? And I was like, I think that oftentimes when we have a wound that's so deep and we've wrapped it up for years and years and generations, when you unwrap that wound, it's like, oh my God, it smells and there's a lot of pus and like, you know, it's not pretty, but that is also healing. But what's also healing is like playing inner child play with friends and like running around on the beach and playing tag. You know, what's also healing is like laying under some covers and making pillow forts, you know, and dancing and laughing and like making jokes about the trauma with other people who get it, and then being like, oh, but we're joking about it because we are not feeling the real pain underneath. Like all of that matters, and all of it it's just, you know, and like and the nature stuff, like there's so much beautiful healing I think to be done with our planet, and it's just I don't know, I don't have words for it.
And I think that's okay. It can be a feeling. There's no one way to do healing. There's absolutely and it might change, and you might do one version and you get to a point and you're like, yeah, good, I'm done with that, and then bam, there's something else and you're like, fuck,
totally
I'm done with this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then it just keeps going in a cycle, because I guess that's it. It's like the older I get, I just think, that's what we're here to do.
Yeah.
And we are here to suffer and figure out what it means and have some beautiful fun with it. Because otherwise,
and I think especially at this time, like we're at this kind of precipice in the way I see it of culture shifting and, you know, environmental challenges and all these things. And if we want to create something new, you know, so many of the barriers to healing, I think, are from our culture and the ways that we've internalized it. And, you know, we're like, oh, I need to show up for that 9 to 5 and pay the car payment and, you know, do the rent. And, you know, we don't have space for community, and we're not living in tribes anymore. And we're disconnected from the fact that we're freaking animals. And that's all trauma in and of itself. And it prevents us from being able to do it. But if we can find ways and moments and just like tiny little seconds of doing it, then that's how we create something totally new. And I'm so excited to see what kind of new world and culture we create, because I really deeply believe that it's possible.
It has to be. Like, it has to be. And I think a huge part of why we have these conversations and why we do this stuff is because there's that next, well, like we've got kids, that next generation of going, if you don't want to, yeah, as you were saying before, if you don't want to hand on the box of trauma and destruction and all the heavy negative stuff, all the big heavy rocks instead of the then something has to shift. We have to do something different. Instead they're like, you know, I see sometimes people, not all the time, but in that older generation, they're like, oh, well, you know, I'm going to die soon anyway. What?
Yeah.
I don't care that I could be going to be wearing like 400 factor sunscreen and not be able to go outside and yeah.
Yeah, totally.
But it's a thing that gets handed down, the scarcity and the fear and the all of that stuff. I guess if we take that back to birth, how's birth work, whatever version of that world you want to do? I think the two of them are like, they're different sides of the same coin, really. Birth.
Oh, totally.
Talk to me about how that's been for you.
Yeah. I've always loved birth, like and mothering, and like I've just always, since I was little, I was like, if I get pregnant at 16, I'd be cool. I'm glad I didn't. Really, really, truly glad. But I just could not wait to be a mother and experience pregnancy and birth. Yeah, I was just like watching all the videos. Yeah, just a super big birth nerd always. And it's funny though, because when I thought about being a doula originally, I was like, oh, but that's like for other people. Like, I don't know that I could do that. But yeah, so for me, there's so much to be learned in birth experiences. And I think the fear one is so interesting. I actually just did an IGTV video about this because, like you said, we pass on the fear, and so many of us carry deep ancestral trauma around birth. And there's this whole idea going around about birthing without fear, and I think that that's actually not very wise. Like, if we have fear, let's move with it, let's express it, preferably before birth, but then also if it comes up in birth, we know what to do. Like, it's fine to be afraid in birth, it's fine to be angry in birth, so long as we're not holding it in and repressing it, because that's when it's going to cause, you know, issues, I think. But yeah, so for me, I had an incredible birth experience, and there are still lots of lessons from it, you know, and things that next time, you know, I would do differently. And it's interesting because I just, in America, I never would have birthed in a hospital system, because things are a lot
I don't
worse
even
there.
need to explain that. I think most people are like, okay.
America. So yeah, I was very questioning of the Australian system. Like, every time I went in, and like I just couldn't get over like getting a Medicare card, and like I was like, and are you going to charge me for this? And they were like, no, like they just thought I was so weird, and I was like, I'm gonna get a bill, aren't I? Yeah, I just didn't think I could afford a home birth, which, like, looking back, like I could have, like I knew I wanted a home birth, and to be birthing in nature, like, there's so much there. But yeah, I birthed at home on my due date for about 12 hours or labored at home. And I was convinced, I was like, very much like, it could be, you know, due dates don't mean anything, and, you know, it could be anytime. And I had no signs. And then my husband and I had sex. And about 30 minutes later, I started to have some cramps, but I was just convinced the whole time. I was like, this is not the real deal. Like, it's just going to fade away. And so my husband was like sleeping. He went to work for a bit. My doula came over, and then she left for a bit. And then, you know, so I was just going with it, just moving, just in the shower a lot. And really, I think I was timing contractions for the first like 10 minutes maybe, and then I didn't time them the whole rest of the time. I was just like, I actually don't care about this, and I'm not paying attention to this app at all. And then yeah, I just really didn't feel the need to go to the hospital at all, which looking back, I'm like, you know, I had this thing of like, so I ended up pushing on the toilet. I just all of a sudden went, ah! And I was like, oh, maybe it is real. Maybe it's time to go to the hospital. And like, I was like, oh, I don't want to have a car baby, but like, car babies are great. Like, why didn't I just say like, actually, I'll just stay home or have a car baby instead of the hospital? But yeah, so I had one of my friends, Dasha Clark, who's a fellow doula, had told me that in her birth, she was just like shouting, I can do this. And at the time, I was like, that's a bit cheesy, isn't it? I had done a sprint triathlon a couple of years before my birth, and it was such an incredible experience of being in my body and you know, that building new neural pathways of relating to myself and believing in myself. And so I hit this point in the shower when I was at home where I was like, oh, they're just going to keep coming back, and it's just going to keep happening. And I was like, oh my God, if this is what keeps going on, then like it's going to be a horrible rest of the ride. So from that point on, I was like, I can do this. I can do this. They're going to keep coming back, and they're just going to keep getting stronger until my baby gets here. I can do this. And just on repeat, I was like, I can do this. And I was like wearing this like old blue bathrobe that I'd gotten. And there was no parking out front. So we like got to the hospital, and I was like in the parking garage, like in the elevator, I can do this. And like in the waiting room. And I still didn't really believe it was real until it was happening. But
it's almost like that. I remember having the feeling like, I think I'm just pretending. Like, I think I just want this so badly. I remember shutting myself in the bathroom at my second birth and I think I might just be pretending. It's like,
yeah. It's like, what?
Baby coming out of my body, but I think I'm just pretending.
Just Braxton Hicks. It's just Braxton Hicks, actually. No. So yeah. Yeah, I had quite a beautiful birth experience. You know, like I said, next time I definitely learned a lot from it. And just around having like that, I deserve to have continuity of care. I deserve to have the birth of my freaking dreams, not what I thought was possible, you know? And that's, I think, one of the deep griefs of this time is that so many of us don't even dare to dream about the birth that's possible because there's so much fear there. And I think that really, for me, being trauma informed, a huge piece of it is about feeling feelings and moving our feelings with our body and our voice. And if we push that fear to the side and we say, like, I went to this like birthing bliss workshop, and I just felt the whole time like I couldn't. My dad had just killed himself, and I had all this deep stuff going on. I was like, is my vaginismus going to impact my birth? You know, I'm like Googling like child sexual abuse survivors and birth, and I was like, oh, I can't really bring this into the birthing bliss workshop now, can I? So I'm like sitting there with these other pregnant ladies. Yeah, I'm just like pretending with them that like it's all happy and great and yep, cool, you know. And it really wasn't. I just didn't have that space, you know. I was like, and the thing is too that like I'm so great at advocating for myself in so many ways. And so besides the birthing bliss workshop, I was very like clear, like to my doula and other people that like, yes, this is hard and these are the things I have going on. You know, and I called doulas, I was like, I'm a child sexual abuse survivor and these are the things. And are you a feminist? Do you, you know, like, and because I was so like verbal, you know, I think everyone just thought like, oh, she's fine. Like she's, you know, she's going to get the resources she needs and whatever. And I wasn't. And, you know, that's, I think one of the biggest issues with really intense developmental trauma is this like intense mask of, yep, I'm fine. And, you know, even if I'm saying, you know, like I would say to my husband, I'm really not okay. But then I look so okay that he's like, yeah, but look at her. And I'm like, no, it's not. I just can't, I couldn't express that. And I didn't have the space within myself to do that. Yeah.
It's a thing that happens a lot. And I think going back to what you're saying, because I was going to ask you anyway, about your thoughts, feelings about this concept of trauma-informed care. I think something that I'm trying to figure out a way to teach this to people better is that you can't just look at someone and go, oh, she seems quite put together. She seems like she's asking for what she wants. Therefore, it's like the, you know, what is it, the analogy of the duck or the swan who's all bliss, on the top, and then underneath they're like, fuck, help me, I'm dying. Because that is, again, this is what you had to do to survive your childhood. The biggest, I think, thing often that people don't get about childhood trauma is how much you will adapt, be a chameleon, you do what you need to do to get these people to feed you, take care of you, to give you water, to give you somewhere safe to sleep. And, you know, having worked in child protection, and how many times people are like, I can't believe, like, why would they ever want to go back with their parents? Like, so many times when children are taken away from their parents through foster care or whatever it might be, that go back, and people really struggle with the why would you want to go back after what they did to you? Like, but you're misunderstanding that, you know, evolutionary connection of these people. Like my tribe, they've kind of kept me alive. Yes, they maybe have a good job, but when you're a kid, you don't know that, so you just adapt and do what you need to do.
And you want to help them. You know, I think that's a huge piece for me, is that, for, you know, I wanted to help my parents, and even in my healing, like and one of the biggest griefs for me around my dad was that now I have a space where he could have come and he would have had space for healing. And I, like, you know, this is a real controversial thing, and there are so many nuances here, but there were no other spaces before. You know, it was like, you know, some like death sentence stamp of like, you're the worst person. And like, he did horrifying things, you know, but it's like also so many of us that have experienced this trauma, there's such a bigger picture to everything that's going on. It's not like that, you know, there's just so much there. And there's rage and there's hatred. And sometimes I'm like, I wish that I had killed him, you know, like, so it's like, it's a very complex thing, and oftentimes people struggle to hold the complexities of it all, I think.
Like, it's not, it's definitely not a black and white thing. And the grief, that there often is a real grief process for survivors as well, with the like, okay, they're trying to compartmentalize. There's this version of one person, but then like the rest of the world is trying to make it into like this archetype that doesn't exist.
Yeah, and this evil monster. And it's like, if he was an evil monster, one of you guys would have freaking noticed, you know, like maybe somebody would have helped. But no, instead, you know, like, and I think for me, there's this thing around, if like, I want to live in a world where there's space for healing for all of us. And if I don't live in that world, that means I live in a world where there are monsters and evil that, you know, are beyond repair. And that's just not my reality. You know, and sadly, in our world, there isn't much space for it, which is why we see such huge rates of child sexual abuse and domestic violence and all this stuff. You know, it's like, we don't accept domestic violence. And it's like, oh, great, because it's happening everywhere. So great tactic there. Instead of like, hey, is domestic violence happening? Here's a safe space to explore what's going on in your family. You know, like that would be probably way more useful than like, I've just, as we've been driving, I've been seeing all these signs that say, we do not accept domestic violence. And I'm like, well, that's weird, because I bet it's happening in a lot of these homes right now. So
yeah. And again, if you're going back to birth and supporting people and all that kind of stuff, it's like, the grief process of that for a lot of people, of having your support system, even if you can acknowledge and be cognizant, yes, my support system has got a lot of flaws, but it's my support system. And this reactionary, like, well, let's just get rid of that. Let's just round everybody up and stick them on an island instead of trying to work with it, which is, I mean, we're not like making out like that's an easy thing to do, but it's also people realizing that, working with people who have trauma might mean somebody who is very poised and together and asks for what they want and still struggles. Or it might be, I remember when I was talking to Erica Kramer about this, and how her kind of almost default for survival was like just rage woman, like pushing people like, you motherfucker, don't you do this, don't you do that, which is also like, oh my god, like, that's a trauma response, that's a survival response. Okay, like not taking everything so personally. In that moment, it's not about you. So it can look like different things. I often think also about like kids in the classroom, and the kid who is anxious and sucks their thumb, and how so much people will easily warm to that, whereas the kid who's up on the desk throwing stuff at people and spitting, like completely different response. And like, it's the same shit, it's just different packaging. So being mindful what packaging trauma might come in, I suppose, is a roundabout way of where I was going to with that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, like in my senior year of high school, I was absent by like, there are 4 9-week periods. And by the third 9 weeks, I'd been absent 70 days, which is like, that's totally not legal. But my parents didn't care. I would just, at the end of the 9 weeks, I would go and get printout of the days I would miss. The attendance ladies knew me and they hated me. And I would write a note for my parents and I would say, you know, please excuse, I've changed my name. So my name was Kevy back then. It was Kevin. It's a whole nother story. But please excuse Kevy for, you know, all these, just this list of dates. And, you know, she was sick and then they'd sign it and then that was that. And because I had good enough grades and whatever, like that was it. And a lot of my teachers like hated me for it. And they hated me for being, you know, just like flippant and, you know, not showing up to school and whatever. But none of them, I don't think, you know, and teachers are not resourced in the way that they should be. And, you know, like, so I'm not at all blaming the teachers here. But, you know, it's like, it's like, oh yeah, she's just some like privileged white kid who, you know, just skip school when she wants to, kind of a thing. And it's like, well, guys, actually there was a lot more going on.
Yeah, of course. Just because you look relatively washed and can smile doesn't mean anything. But I think it's a thing also that we don't want to acknowledge, that we have this idea of, I would know if a child was in trouble. Because somehow I would sense it, I would feel it, I would see it. And a lot of the time you have to acknowledge, well, no, people don't.
Yeah. And especially if they've been working since they were in the womb to, you know, keep it all in and protect themselves and protect their family. And, you know, it's so under the wraps then. And I think that's why for me, like trauma-informed care, like the biggest thing for me is one, recognizing how trauma has impacted you, because the reality is trauma has impacted all of us, even if it's just in the relationships that we have with other people. We're all connected. And I guarantee everyone knows a survivor of intense developmental trauma, and that alone impacts us. But then also the trauma of living in this world, in this society, in this culture. The trauma of disconnection from the earth is massive, and the trauma of repressing our feelings is also massive. Most of us were told, knock it off, everything's fine, get it together, stop crying, there's nothing to be afraid of. And that's huge. Like one of my favorite quotes about trauma is from Peter Levine, and it's, trauma is not what happens to us, but what we hold inside in the absence of an empathetic witness. And we all have those experiences. And so being trauma informed is about realizing, you know, it's not about knowing the statistics and about trying to be like, do you have trauma? Like, no. It's about knowing how it impacts us and knowing what's going on in the world. Like, I do think it's useful to know how deep trauma runs for a lot of people and to be aware of some of the stuff, you know, about developmental trauma and ancestral trauma and intergenerational trauma, because I think most of that impacts all of us too. And then it's also about feeling feelings. And so often people don't, you know, like, I've talked to, you know, doulas who have something going on and they're like, oh gosh, like, you know, should I refer? And, you know, oh, I don't know if I can deal with this, whatever. And I'm just like, how are you feeling? And often they're feeling scared. They're feeling like a bit of shock. And, you know, like if someone hasn't heard these kinds of stories before and someone brings them in, that's in your world now. It's in your body and it's your responsibility to move with it. If it's come up. And maybe the answer is referring, you know, I don't know, but what we can't do is just stay in our minds and move from there, because that's not trauma informed at all. And I think it's so important to move with those feelings and have spaces for ourselves to move with them. And it doesn't have to be, you know, with a practitioner specifically working in that, but I think that can be really useful. But it can be with a friend. It can be with another doula person, someone who you have to witness you and your feelings, because we're also meant to be feeling with each other. One of the key aspects of emotions is that we are seen in them, because they're a way that we communicate with our people, with our herd, with other animals. And so moving with those feelings, most of us have quite a lot of trauma around, so it's hard and it feels like, oh no, I'll just do that later. Or actually, you know, we have all these excuses and coping mechanisms around like, oh, I actually feel a lot, you know, I cry quite a bit, you know, so I'm good there. I'm totes a feeling person. And what I teach is around practicing feeling the feelings, which creates the new neural pathway of being safe to feel.
Mm. Yeah.
So just, you know, so I call it an emotion circle, which I learned from innate wisdom connection. And that's just, you know, it can take a minute, 2 minutes of going through, you know, joy, fear, anger, and just with the body and the sound, if I was feeling this feeling, what would it look like, you know? And this is a healthy and safe way to express any emotion that there is. We have so much shame around, especially emotions like anger and fear. And moving with them, and it helps to then when the feelings come up later to go, this is what's happening. And, you know, we can go and find, you know, I wouldn't suggest if you're with a client, just being like, and totally moving with your fear, depending on what you're doing and what the client is. But, you know, going, I'm noticing fear right now. So later when I get into my car, when I go to the bathroom, you know, or just saying, hey, I just need to go to the bathroom real quick, and going into the bathroom and going, you know, like that's what fear looks like. Fear does not look like deep breaths. I have a lot of, I mean, meditation is great, but also it's not how we feel. And yeah, that's the key to trauma informed stuff for me. It's not about knowing all the things, because like there are people that have repressed memory until they're 70. So it's not about knowing whether or not they do, you know, it's about working from a place that is useful for everyone you work with, you know.
Yeah, I think that's so true, because I think we also want to think that if we're really grounded and really nice and really supportive, like people tell us, and I think this is, I guarantee you there are people who have a story and they ain't telling anyone, maybe ever.
Totally. Even themselves.
That's the story they're saying today. And it's not, that's not the job. The job is not to tick off stuff on forms and be like, cool, we did that. It's acknowledging that even if you did all the things, whatever all the things are, you are still going to have people, maybe even yourself, who are like, okay, yep, that's not coming out. I don't even know what language to put on it, if that's a thing, if it's not a thing, so we'll just leave it, which is what you're going back to again with the connecting that you're feeling something in your body, whatever it might be. All my heart rate's come up, or I feel a bit sick, or I feel a bit weird. And then, as you say, if you're in birth work or you're with a client, patient, whatever term you want to use, connecting that with something else. So when I open the door to go to the toilet, when I close the door, when I turn a light switch on, when I do something, that's when I'm going to go back to that and go, okay, what was that feeling? Talk to someone about it. I think a huge thing that birth workers seem to be doing a lot of, and I've talked about this over and over and over, but I keep talking about it again because it's so important, is stuffing stuff down and being, particularly like if you're new and you're like too shit scared to say, I felt really scared, I felt really something when this came up, because we're taught to put the face on, go and do the work, don't bring your stuff in. It's different. It's
keep calm and carry on.
Yeah, that's it.
I'm here for you.
That's
and it's like, no, actually, you can't be here for me if you're not here for yourself, and if you're not present with what's coming up for you. And that's like, I think too, like there's just so much magic in there. Like there's so much healing and so much magic in moving with and expressing whatever is coming up. Like I really love process work, which is created by Arnold Mandel. And it's really, the key is that whatever's happening, whatever is going on in the environment is useful and worthy of being looked at and unfolded, you know. And I think it's key to build trust with yourself, because if you say, I'll go and feel that feeling later, and you don't, then your body remembers that, and it's going to come out sideways one way or another. It's going to come out in some strange interaction with a client. It's going to come out in the birth space. It's going to come out in your relationship. It's going to come out with your child. It's going to come out in self-hatred, or, you know, addiction or depression, burnout, you know. And that's exactly what vicarious trauma is when something is brought to us and we don't feel it and we don't acknowledge, you know, like in I think it's trauma and recovery, they talk about how you know, if you're a therapist and someone comes to you with a bunch of Holocaust stories, for example, and maybe you've never, you know, felt much or related much to the Holocaust, and now all of a sudden there's all this stuff about the Holocaust that's in your mind, that's impacting your body, that's there. And if you don't move with it, if you don't have space for it, it impacts you, and it impacts the person you're working with, and it impacts the whole relationship and the whole environment. And that might sound like a kind of, you know, like scary, like, oh, it impacts me kind of a thing, but there's just so much healing and magic in you feeling it. You know, a lot of people are like, oh, but that's not my thing, that's not my, you know, and like with my husband, for example, it's like so easy to say, oh, well, that's Lotus's trauma and she's the one that has to deal with it, she has to live with it. He has to live with it too. You know, it impacts him too. He never knew that things like what happened to me happen in the world. And there's healing in him in him moving with that stuff for his own life. Even though it's not his story, it's still, there's just so much magic in there, and magic for our relationship and for the whole world.
That's so true. It's so true. That's why I always think, like, yeah, trauma is the teacher. It's the here. It's for the lessons. And you know, the more that you can say you don't want the lessons and they're not here and they're not for you and they're not relevant and whatever, they'll come up. Yeah. They'll keep coming up.
And it'll just keep repeating. You know, I think that like, I think it's trauma healing that is the teacher, because trauma in and of itself is just going to keep repeating and cycling, and, you know, old pathways just on repeat. And if we don't have space for it, then we probably won't learn much. But if we can show up for the healing, if we can make it to that space, and if we can keep trying, like, it is so hard sometimes. You know, like I sat across, when I was pregnant after my dad died, I sat across from a therapist who was physically uncomfortable with what I was bringing into the room. Like, she was like just adjusting her clothes and going, and she eventually recommended me to Al-Anon meetings, because community was really where healing happens. So she recommended that I go to Al-Anon meetings because I might find other people with similar stories. And that sucked. It really, really sucked. I was in the depths of despair and I needed help, and she did not help me. You know, I showed up and I went and I made the effort to get to that space, and it wasn't helpful. But it also, like, there's still use in continuing to show up. And I just, you know, I want to acknowledge to anyone that's listening that's like, I don't know that it's worth it, or, you know, it hasn't worked in the past, that there's still magic out there, and there's still hope, and whatever has happened in the past is useful to be unfolded and is useful to be worked with. And like, there's so much possibility in healing. And we feel so blinded often by the trauma because it tells us, like, no, don't look at me. You know, that's what all the coping mechanisms say. And, you know, with people with repressed memories that don't want to look at stuff, like, I get it. And it takes so much courage to be able to say, this is true, you know? And for me, like, there will always be parts of me that say, no, it's not true. You're just lying. You're just making it up. And that's been a journey of realizing that, like, it's okay for those parts of me to still be there too. I don't have to, you know, I think I thought that I would somehow get to a place where I was like, I 100% know for a fact that it happened. I don't think I will ever get there, you know, and that's okay, because these other parts of me kept me alive for so long. And I have power to negotiate with them and to say, hey, you know, I hear you and I need a bit of space from you. Can you please shuffle aside a bit? And I can grow these new patterns as well. But I also have a lot of compassion for those parts, because, you know, like I said, they helped me get here to now, and they matter too.
Self-compassion's pretty, I think that's often the hard thing for people to get to, even after you've done loads of work, seen loads of people. I think that comes up for me a lot is compassion for others, but not so much compassion for self. So that
totally.
Yeah, and I think that's good to acknowledge that it's hard sometimes to be, it's not even being nice to yourself, it's actually just, you know, the amazing work that you can do, the amazing conversations you can have with other people, but be able to do that to yourself, for yourself, is really hard sometimes.
Totally. It is so hard. And I think it comes back to, like, Brene Brown talks about how we can, you know, tell our children all these things, and we can tell them to be compassionate, and we can be compassionate with them all we want. But if we're not compassionate with ourselves, at the end of the day, that's what they're going to see and that's what they're going to learn. And most of us did not grow up with parents or adults around who were compassionate with themselves because they had trauma too. And so as much as we've seen people being compassionate towards other people, it's that thing of like, if the adults that were around us weren't doing it for themselves, then that's what we learn from. And it's like, there's so much pressure, I think, around self-love these days. And I'm all for it if it's real. I'm also not for band-aids. And I think a lot of what happens in a lot of the work is a bunch of band-aiding and wrapping and new masks and new, it's like, oh, now I fit into this and now I love myself. And it's just, there's still a lot of wounding and, like I say, pus and, rotting flesh underneath the self-love. And it's there all along. And so if what's real and true for you is that you hate yourself, move with that and acceptance will come. And, having people around you who can invite you to be compassionate with yourself. And like, I was at a workshop recently where we did quite a bit of shadow work, and I actually, I have these skulls. I have a little altar next to me. I found 2 skulls. This is one of them. And my intuition led me to them. It was so strange. Never found a skull in my life before. This is the other one. And I was like, what are these skulls here for? Like, what's going on? And what I got was that it was about the shadow. And so then I was like, okay, well, the shadow is about what we're unconscious of. So it can be a bit of a tricky thing to work with, because it's like, if I'm totally unconscious of it, how can I find out what it is? Yeah. So over the workshop, I was, reflecting onto that and, asking for guidance around it and stuff. And, one of the things that came up for me that was the shadow was self-compassion. And I was like, oh God, it's this, I have so much resistance sometimes to it. And to the inner child work. And, like, I love that stuff. And I love doing it with other people, but so often with myself still, it's like, oh, do we have to? And yeah, it's hard, and it's hard to, and it's a lot easier to pretend that I do, or pretend that I'm this way, or to put a Band-Aid on, or to use positive affirmations. And I think affirmations can be useful if we felt the feelings, because it's like, if there's an old neural pathway of, I'm not good enough, I'm what's wrong with the world, that's one of my big ones. Like, it's my fault. This is happening because I'm bad. And if that's the neural pathway, and I just throw at it a bunch of, I love myself, I love those neural pathways, like, I don't care what you're doing over here. Like, you can fluff around with that all you want. But if I move with the feelings and I express my shame, and I'm like, oh, I'm not good enough, I'm a trash whore, I'm horrible. Like, that's often what shame looks like. Then I can help to kind of release that neural pathway and loosen it up, and I can become more conscious of that neural pathway, and that's how we can create new ones. And so then I can bring in some positive affirmations or some other practices, or because I have a bit more space for it. But if I don't feel the feelings with my body and my voice, not my mind, then there's no space for it. So I mean, you can still, like, I do think it does work in some kind of Band-Aidy way, but I think underneath there's still a lot of self-hatred going on for a lot of us.
Oh yeah, I would agree with that so much. Because I think it depends on the context in which you do it. And I think, any of us can sit in the warm bubble bath and do the affirmations. But if you're rushing through it and you're like, for me, a lot of my resistance comes around like that. Oh, like, it's cheesy, it feels icky, and it has to come back to that, like, no, hang on, like, that whole history of being rushed through every self-care thing in your life. To slow down and actually take care of you means acknowledging, like, that you're worth taking care of, which for a lot of us, funnily enough, who go into helping healing professions, love taking care of other people, get so much validation and joy and good, warm, fuzzy feelings out of it, but we don't like doing that for ourselves because we're not worthy.
Yeah,
we're not
totally.
enough, or we're unlovable, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
I think that might hit for some people when you're identifying with that, like, oh, I'm so good at doing that for other people. I can give people lots of lists of affirmations and wonderful self-love things to do. But are you just like looking at yourself sideways in the mirror when you're reading it and going,
Yeah. And often we don't even realize it. We're kind of unconscious of it, and we just, put these new Band-Aids and masks and shove more stuff, and it's just more under the surface, and we don't even realize how much deep self-hatred and wounding there is there. And that's a big ancestral one, I think, especially for women, and people of color and trans people and any marginalized group. I think it's huge, all the shame that we carry around who we are and what our bodies are. And, we have all this freaking advertising everywhere. And, I think also for me, around the inner child stuff, I have this big, like, oh, it's childish, and that's like, I was like an adult from age 2, it's like, oh, look how mature, I think a lot of people with developmental trauma get that, like, wow, you're so mature. Thanks. It was the trauma. But I have this huge, like, it's childish thing. And I think for me, a big helpful practice has been stepping into adult me, because often the resistance that's coming up is from a child part of me that doesn't think it's safe, that's like, this is childish. Nobody, and it's often like my grandfather and my father's voice and, being like, this is dumb. This is just silly, knock it off. And so coming into the adult me and being like, I'm here now. I see that you don't want to do this. I see that this makes you uncomfortable and that you're scared and that you think it's weird, but I want to do this because it's important to me and I care about my healing, and I'm here now. You don't have to drive the bus. I've got the wheel. In fact, I don't want you to drive the bus anymore. It's dangerous. And like, I have this space that I take my inner children to, and it's like by a waterfall in Sri Lanka. It's a house that I built in my mind and body for them, and it's like, it's protected by a Harry Potter wizardry charm spell as well. And it's got all these, I have like so many, I've got like 5,000 inner children, lots of different splits and ages and things. And they all want to drive the bus often. And so when it gets overwhelming, I take them there and I say, I've got to do this thing. This is important to me, whatever. Like before this interview, I was like, hey, you all hang out here. I have some helpful ancestors that hang out and take care of them and make them snacks and hear them cry and whatever else is going on. And then I step into adult me, and adult me knows different things. Sometimes it's hard to find adult me. It's like, I don't think she's there. There's so many inner children that are like, no, she doesn't exist. But more and more, I build the pathway of finding her and owning who I am now, and stepping into that and caring for them. And it's incredible, uncomfortable work.
I think you make it beautiful. You make it beautiful and something that other people could grab, even just a little morsel of. They'd be lucky to be in your splash zone, really.
Thanks.
What do you want to plug?
Well, I have a zine that I'm about to release. I don't have the link for that yet, but it's called I Know Another Mother, and it's stories of mothers that have survived childhood sexual abuse. I'm super excited to release that and continue journeying with those stories. I also have a free Facebook group called Mental Mamas United, which is all about just kind of owning and sharing real truths around how motherhood is mental. I have a 6-week kind of expansive healing foundational journey that I'm offering, which can be for pregnancy. I'm a full spectrum doula, and I work with the idea that birth includes rebirth and postpartum is forever. So anything is really welcome. And also, I also work with the idea that motherhood and mothering is a stage in life for many of us. And so, I work with people that don't have physical children earthside as well, that are in the time of, early 20s, late 20s, 30s, whatever. And I do a lot of work with child sexual abuse survivors as well, and people that just want to feel feelings. Emotional expression is one of my big things. And I'm also about to relaunch my facilitated online community, which is called Being With What Is. And that's a lifetime membership to a space where I share master classes and different resources. And it's kind of like my house for all the things. And yeah, lots of other exciting projects to come, but those are the big ones right now.
That's a pretty good start. That's
Yeah. I got big visions.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. It was truly an honor.